Well, hello there again. We're going to look at the road to World War II now. And there's going to be a little crossover between this and the Allies and Enemies presentation, but not too much. So we need to start with the background. Where it breaks loose. We've got a couple of premises we need to deal with. Number one is that America is going to be concerned about the Great Depression at home. That is the first, there's really and truly the core issues that FDR is going to have to deal with, but the impact of that is going to be incredible because while America is not dealing with the outside world so much, you're going to get the rise of dictators in Japan. Okay, not as huge of a deal because they've kind of been on a little different governmental system anyhow, but you're going to get them in Italy and you're going to get them in Germany, and when you get all three of those hooked up together, it's going to be some fun. And so while we're concerned with what's going on here, that's going to let them do their thing without a lot of adult supervision, so to speak. And then you've got the bigger problem that FDR's got. Most Americans do not want to get involved in another conflict. They thought World War I had been an error, that the results had not been nearly worth the price, and we're not getting involved in another one that's up to those people in Europe to get themselves out of. And then you get a worldwide depression. And that's one of the allows like the Mussolinis and the Adolf Hitlers of the world to come to power, because without that, decent countries don't elect totalitarians, but they did. Now, that's going to quote here from Calvin Coolidge in 25. It says the people have all the war and all the taxation and all the military service that they want. They have. America does not want any part of this thing. But the world sometimes doesn't beat to America's drum. What's up happening is 1936, Adolf Hitler becomes Times Man of the Year. They don't like that, but it did happen. And so again, America's domestic policy is number one. At the London Economic Conference, we say, you know what, boys, we're off the gold standard. Hitler becomes Times Man of the Year, and our foreign policy remains isolationist officially. FDR's kind of wanting us to get involved in this a little bit, what's going on a little bit, kind of put a stop to it or at least be a player, but Congress is having none of it. And I said, was it true? Because there's going to be some things that America can do or does do that kind of do get our fingers kind of in the water a little bit. But it's in the backdrop of the WWII committee and this idea of the merchants of death. Whereas, that's the reason that America got into World War I was because all these industrialists and bankers had given out these loans and suckered America in, and we had to get in it to get our money back. You know what? There's not as much truth in that as they wanted you to believe, though there's just enough to where there's some surface logic in it. And then lastly, America never did join the League of Nations. Not wanting to be bound by some of the treaties, constructs and limited in what America could do. Worldwide depression does create some problems. It creates havoc with economies. I want you to look at this next piece. 50% unemployment. That's official. 50%. America officially was 25%, so it's twice as bad over there. Japan, exports dropping by half. This is a country that's trying to become a Western industrialized nation that doesn't quite have all the raw materials, and their exports drop by 50%. But America and Western Europe are the hardest hit by far. I mean, Russia, good Lord only knows what they're doing over there. I mean, you really don't know with the way Stalin set up the communist economy. And in both areas, the middle class economy gets hurt the worst because they're the ones that have the most to lose when the economy goes south. Rich people tend to stay relatively wealthy. Poor people were poor anyhow, but the middle class can go from comfortable to destitute in no time. Over in USSR, there we go. I knew they were going to pop up. In the midst of that 5-year plan, so you can't do anything with Stalin. You just got to let him do his thing. But what's happening is in Western Europe and America, people are looking for answers and help. In America, it came in the form of FDR. In Germany, it came in the form of Adolf Hitler. In Italy, it came in the form of Benito Mussolini. So in the meantime, like I said, America's foreign policies, isolationists, they don't want to be involved in the world affairs anymore. And we already know that's because of World War I. We're really isolationist. Not really in name, but not in fact. But that's okay. We'll get to all that. So the League of Nations becomes very ineffective. Some ways much like the UN today, but I like to make fun of the UN. America doesn't join. That created a problem. Then Germany leaves in 1933. Soviet Union never was let in. So you got three of the big players not even in this thing. One of the problems was Great Britain used its empire, and every little country that it controlled, it said they need a seat, they need a seat. So it's like the British country club, so to speak. So three of the big players in the coming war, not even there, 33. So you got a problem. Rise of the totalitarian man Mussolini. And the reason I call him that, Mussolini's an interesting character. He kind of like wants to play dictator. He doesn't like to be evil, mean, and nasty like Adolf in so many ways. I mean, don't take that in all literalness, but he's a former socialist, and then he turns fascist, which is like on the other side of the political spectrum, even though they act alike. And he got a group of people, these black shirts he called the fascisti, and they would beat up on the communists, and that's how he became. People loved him because he beat up on the communists, and eventually he's going to hold so much sway with the people that the Italian King Victor Emmanuel said, "You know what? You get to be in charge." I mean, transferred power to this bozo Il Duce, Mussolini. He institutes something called corporatism, which basically means the government's going to run these big businesses. And I put on here, he wants to play dictator. He likes it. The trappings of it are fun. But he becomes involved with a very bad actor in the name of Adolf Hitler. And so you got the Rome-Berlin axis. So he's like the little brother to Hitler's big brother. And Hitler's always getting him into trouble. And sometimes Mussolini gets himself into trouble that we're going to see later. And he wants an empire. Italy hadn't had an empire since like Caesar. I mean, literally since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And so he's going to have one. So what's going to happen is he's going to try to find it. He's going to North Africa to do it. But people liked him because his dictatorial style, in some ways, can effectively manage part of a country's economy. And he makes the trains run on time. People for years said that after his death. He made the trains run on time. And he has some really great expressions. Check him out. You gotta love my man Mussolini. One of these days. Anyhow, no. So he's an interesting character. So he's down there in Italy, but when he right here, he's got a problem. And so here you have a man and Adolf, who came from a very broken family, and I don't mean like divorce and whatnot, but his father Alois was something else. He used to beat him all the time. And his childhood was like that, and he loved his mother so much, and his daddy was just like a weirdo and a philanderer, and he never had a lot of talent, but he wanted to go to art school, couldn't get in because he couldn't draw people, and a psychologist would have a field day with this now. So when World War I breaks out, Hitler's actually not German any more than I am, he's Austrian, and so he tries to join the Austrian army, and they're like, nope, don't want you. And so he goes to Germany and joins the German army, and they're like, we'll take you. And so that happens. He comes out of the war, and he's still in the army as a corporal, I believe. And the Weimar Republic that takes over the governing of Germany decides they want to have him spy on the Nazi Party. And so he goes to the Nazi Party to spy on them, but then he decides he's going to join them and becomes this incredible orator, this crazy effective speaker that can rally people to his cause. And he keeps telling them, I'm going to make Germany strong again. The economy at 50% unemployment, I mean, goodness gracious, I'm going to make Germany strong again. And he said, the problems? It's other people's. The Versailles, they listen. It was they crapped on us. The Allies, they're sorry people. They keep doing stuff to us. Oh, and the Jews, because there's not really a racial element in Germany, so you got to make one. And one of the things you make up is the Jews. And his appeal is to the middle class, which it blows my mind, but it makes a lot of sense because he says, I'm going to take you back to where you were. He says, I'm going to fix this economy. It's not your fault. It's somebody else's fault. And to the middle class, that is very, very appealing at this time. And so at first, the Nazis get elected. So Hitler gets elected. He didn't take over. He's going to assume those dictatorial powers later from Paul von Hindenburg. And it's not something we're going to necessarily get into here, but he gets elected, folks. That's one thing you need to remember. And begins to assume those powers. And he's not just this rabid anti-Semitic. He is anti-Semitic, but he's not just rabid, we're going to exterminate the Jews from the beginning. That's a gradual thing. But you can see it as far back as Mein Kampf, which if you've ever read it, it looks like it's written by about 5 people, and they all get to write a paragraph and then switch off. Insane. And so it's written while he's in prison after this thing called the Beer Hall Putsch, which was in 1923, where he tried to overthrow the government. So they sent him to jail. They let him out a few months later because like, he's a stooge. Actually, he has some very powerful friends in the government that ended up getting him out. But so he does that in 1923. And so in Mein Kampf, he's going to outline his plan for this new Reich, or this new empire of Germany. And he talks about expansion. He talks about anti-Semitism. He says, here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to grow. Here's how we're going to do it. And it's kind of like a how-to book to be a dictator. So it's kind of that outline for his reign of terror. But let's go to his anti-Semitism minute. And I don't want to deal very much with the Holocaust, and that's unfortunate. We just don't have the time. But his anti-Semitism comes from the Jews being historic pariahs, killed Jesus, scattered, after that second revolt in the Roman Empire, and so they're scattered everywhere, and they're usually successful businessmen, and so they're always they're rich and wealthy and well off, and they're doing things behind the scenes. And what I mean by clannish is, they tend to marry into the same family, into other Jewish families, and they don't go outside of the faith very often. And and then they're seen as very powerful. All this money lets them do things, and they're doing things to me, and they're doing things to our family, doing things to our country. So that's some of those underlying hatreds and prejudices there. But the funny part, I don't think funny is the right word, but I think it's ironic, is that his mother's doctor was Jewish, and when she died, he said that he had never seen anybody as tore up as Adolf was over the death of his mother. And he never blamed her doctor either. It's just a strange little thing. And there was this idea that, Jews had helped cause Germany to lose World War One. And, so the Nazi propaganda picks that up. And then he kind of hatches the Reichstag fire and says, look here what the Jews have done. They're trying to do this. So that Reichstag fire leads to him having more authority and more control. There's some emergency laws passed, emergency powers that are given to him that they never go away. And so later, the Nazis will pass the Nuremberg laws that basically make Jews second-class citizens and everything else that you can imagine. And in the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, you see their businesses destroyed, them beat in the streets. If I was a Jewish individual, I'd be like going, it's my time to leave this place. But of course, we know the end of the book. They didn't at the time. And this is probably one of my favorite pictures of him. Not because he's in it, but because the dog's there. He always had German Shepherds growing up, and it's one even as a child, and he always has this childlike look in his eye. If you ever see another one of him with that dog, it'd be Blondie. So it's weird because his daddy would come home with a drunken rage, would beat him, and he would beat the dog, and Hitler would try to protect the dog. And so anyway, so you see that there's a little sliver of humanity there in what is otherwise one of the most reprehensible human beings of all time. And this is going to be his girlfriend and future wife, Eva Braun, and her dog. And so you always see him in the company of dogs. There's a painting that Hitler did right here. And the question I've got, is this the work of an artist? And it looks pretty good to me, but it wasn't good enough to get him into art school in Vienna. So we've got that. We've got this guy, Hideki Tojo. Oh my goodness, my grandfather Patterson hated this guy. Well, what you get is the rise of the cult of the Japanese military in the early 1900s. Okay? And Emperor Meiji that you see in the movie The Last Samurai revives this code of Bushido, this idea of Japan being a nation of warriors. And Hirohito, Meiji's son, is going to hand over the governing to this military cabinet. He was too pure, to this, to that, in order to run, whereas you've got people like Hideki Tojo and some others who are just basically foaming at the mouth to be in control of the country. The next step is invasion of China. In 1931. I think in the Allies and Enemies it said 32. Have to go check on that. It's not a question I want to ask you on a quiz. But they condemn it. So what happens is Japan says, I'm out of the league. So all the big players, with the exception of Great Britain, are out of the League of Nations. If you go back to last week, we talked about the Hoover-Stimson doctrine, or this idea that America's not going to recognize that as your possession. Don't think it matters. The Japanese have it. So they proclaimed something called a state of Manchukuo. So this is 31. This is 10 years before Pearl Harbor. And so one of the Japanese Aggression. Well, they need stuff. Oil, rubber, and steel. Things they do not have on that island in great abundance. They need what they call growing room for their population. I hear you, just like Adolf, little Lebensraum. They need that growing room, and they're angry at America about that. Remember the Washington Naval Treaty? Cadillac Ford. Immigration restriction in the 1920s. I mean, it's like, well, America's gone out of its way not to be real nice to Japan. And they want to create some trade areas without tariffs. And if you go back to the open door notes, America said, that China will be open to everybody, except China becomes America's little brother, a very special case. And America wanted to control China, whereas Japan's like, you know what? It's going to be us, boss man. Well, Russia, or the Soviet Union, you got Joe Stalin. Oh my goodness. This man is scared of his shadow. He's scared of his own party. He's scared of his own people. He's scared of his wife. He's scared of the military. He's scared of everybody. And so we end up with a bunch of these blood purges. The kulaks, which are a 17 million strong Russian middle class. Got to get rid of them because I'm scared of them. The 5-year plans never worked because he didn't know what he was doing. But as we see in the other lecture, he is our new buddy. Okay, yeah, this is a real good guy right here, brother. So what we have now is what I'll call the totalitarian program, the world response, which is nothing more than a failure of collective security. First part is expansionism. These totalitarian countries want to expand beyond their borders, area to put excess population in, area to draw resources from, to make money off of. So they do that. So the first one's Italy. Maybe back up. First one was Japan and Manchuria in the early 30s. Then Italy decides to invade Ethiopia in 1935. And so what happens? The League throws in sanctions, then lifts them, and that's the end of it because, hey, we made them pay. Not really. And so what happens in Germany? They occupy the Rhineland, which they had to give up under the Treaty of Versailles. What happens? Nobody does a thing. Japan developed something called the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, and they talk about a southern resource area, i.e. the East Indies, which has rubber and oil, two things that they desperately need. So for just a second, I think we recognize this picture. The minute that they throw the sanctions on Italy, then lift them, that's the end of the League as a serious body. And what it does is people that are aggressors or bullies, they get emboldened by that. So, no matter what you do, you just want to take it back. You ain't going to do nothing to us. And so what it sets is a collision course in Europe, and it sets America on a collision course with the Japanese in the Pacific. And you would think America could see this. But again, we know what happens. We know the end of the book, folks. Response. Nope, we're still playing with the Depression. We're not going to join the League. We think the two oceans will protect us from anything. Well, December 11th, 41, September 11th, December 7th, 41. My goodness. September 11th, 2001, this is shown to be some kind of falsehood. But in the 30s, we're all good. And so we passed a series of neutrality acts in America. So we can't trade with countries at war. We can't send them guns. We can't give them any shipping. I mean, it really and truly hurts America's economy in so many ways. But, we talked about the WWII Committee and the American First Committee. We know what those things do. But America had time to build up its armed forces and did not. And this is going to create a little bit of an issue come December the 7th, 1941. But I want you to check this out right here. Got some pretty cool information. Demanding government pensions now so they could visit their son's grave in the future, veterans of future wars. I mean, check that out. I mean, this is 1936, and it's in Princeton, though, so you got to worry about that. But anyhow, but you see the general mood of. And here's another one. Gerald Nye says we didn't win a thing we set out for in that last war. Look at that. 70% in the late 30s, early 40s believe that intervention had been a mistake. Book of the Month Club features this book, Merchants of Death. I mean, think about it. But the next little slide is the one that's going to get you. We're going to have ourselves a little Dr. Seuss. Take a look at that. That is not the Dr. Seuss that we all No. So in the meantime, going on here with our allies, they protesting. They want to negotiate. They don't want to go shoot and blow things up. So they're going to sit on their collective hands. And that's going to be a problem by the end of the 1930s. And so you can see this in the percent of national income spent on defense since in 37. Right about the time you get that second dip of the Great Depression. America, 1.5%. That's a lot because America's got a big old economy, even in 37. But look at the British. The French. I mean, you don't think of the French as a big military power. Adolf. The Japanese. The Soviet Union. You look at those numbers and you can kind of see we're going to have an issue. And the question is, are we blind? Well, it doesn't matter what we know. It matters what they knew and when they knew it. But let's take a look at it. Talk about some armaments production from 40 to 43, which is in the middle of the war. Look at what America does. 1.5 billion to 37.5 billion. That's a jump. You look at Great Britain growing by a factor of, 3.5. The Soviet Union by 2.5. Germany doubled up. Japan's over 4 times. I mean, look at America. It's going to be something else. So what does that tell us? This war's going to be big. It's going to be brutal, but America wasn't ready. You should have seen something in the Spanish Civil War where you have some nationalists under Francisco Franco that here aided by the fascists. They're trying to overthrow, the Republicans that are aided by the Soviet Union. And so what does America do? Pass neutrality, legislation. And Spain goes off the map as any kind of player in what's coming up. They stay relatively neutral. So, opportunity to do something? Didn't do it. Which brings us to something called of appeasement. Something called appeasement. When that's right here, Germany's like that little kid at Walmart that cries and moans with the kid, G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. And then Mama gives in, and you know how this ends up. So the Germans started up with something called a Lebensraum. This idea that Hitler's going to have a plan for some growing room out beyond the Reich, out into what's now Poland. Bring all the Germans home to the Reich, send the people that aren't real Germans the heck out. Okay? And so we want all that stuff we got back. We don't want all that stuff that they had to give up under the Treaty of Versailles. So that's Lebensraum. Then there's the Anschluss, which is the plan to bring all the Germans home and combine Austria, which he's actually Austrian, and Germany. Now, Versailles says you can't do that, but they're not apt to stop him, so they use a plebiscite, which is like this little weird kind of vote. And so now Germany and Austria-Hungary, or the Ostreich, are going to be combined. So now you've got that. What the Allies do, or they at Munich, they said, you know what? We've got to stop. Hitler has said, here's the deal. I'm going to expand, and he demanded Sudetenland. That was part of Czechoslovakia. He said it's Germanic. These are German people. We've got to bring them home. And so what does Neville Chamberlain on the left do? He wants to negotiate. That's exactly what Hitler wants him to do. Hitler's not going to live up to anything that he says he's going to do. And so the Allies, instead of going to war, they're going to give in. And they said, you know what? Hitler says, if you just give me the Sudetenland, and I'm going to show you a map in a second, I won't invade Czechoslovakia. I promise, I promise, I promise. A few months later, he does. Nice map. Sudetenland's this little brown area around Germany there. The rest of it's Czechoslovakia. And so what happens is, home waving this piece of paper, getting off the airplane. He says, I have in my hand peace in our time. I have met with Mr. Hitler, and he is an honorable man. My 11th grade history teacher, some of you may know him, Mr. Roger Harris, who I still talk to on a regular basis, said that was the biggest political turkey of the 20th century. That's until George Bush says, read my lips, no new taxes, but that's okay. In the meantime, Japan doing? They're getting aggressive. Put an end to the Washington Naval Treaty, and they build big old ships, the Yamato and the Musashi, the biggest battleships ever built. Then in 1936, they signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany. Then they signed in 1940 the Tripartite Pact, which joins Germany and Italy as allies, and it becomes, instead of the Rome-Berlin axis, it's the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis. So what do they set off to do, emboldened by all this? Invade China. And as you can see, the Japanese soldiers practicing bayonet drills on Chinese that have surrendered. And it is a legit pick. Well, here's what they want to establish is this new world order, or this new order in Asia where Japan is the hegemonic power and an end to the open door. And so what they do, they move it into the French Indochina because they're French. We take it away from them. The Dutch East Indies, they end up in China with the rape of Nanking. You want to not sleep good at night? Look that up. So what happens is the Generalissimo in charge of China at that time, a man by the name of Chiang Kai-shek, becomes a bulwark against the Japanese. And what happens? America protests. And here you can see FDR. He's talking about, the quarantine speech. We're going to use economic blockades and embargoes against the aggressor nations, as he would say. And that angers the isolationists because what are you doing making the Germans the Japanese mad? Skip over the USS Panay for a minute because, quite frankly, it's not going to matter. But in August of 1939, these two, Hitler and Stalin, who hate each other personally, they hate each other politically, they agree not to fight. Stalin's scared, and Hitler don't want to deal with the power of a riled up Russia. And so when you see the lecture on allies and enemies, this becomes a big problem. That's going to be a problem for both these two guys later. But then they secretly divide Poland because Hitler doesn't want a two-front war. And I put on here Stalin's scared of Hitler, so World War again.